Welcome to Healing Generations, a podcast creating a dialogue uplifting the importance of healing, strengthening, and supporting our communities, and that addresses the disparities and inequities in communities of color. Healing Generations is brought to you by the Healing Generations Institute, a collaborative initiative of the National Compadres Network and the Brotherhood of Elders. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on our new releases.
Well, blessings, bendiciones a todos. My name is Jerry Teo, and I'd like to welcome you here to the Healing Generations podcast. We are so grateful that you've chosen to listen and to join us today on this journey that we've taken, that we're taking. It's part of this journey of life. And the focus for this podcast is really how is it that we can take the medicine of our ancestors, take the teachings that this journey presents to us and help us stay balanced, help us stay well, but help us also heal ourselves and heal generations. And this is really important right now in the time that we're in, but it's important at any time. I'm sure our ancestors found times where they struggled and where they needed different kinds of medicine in that way. We also very intentionally recognize that our ancestors have been through their own trials and tribulations and pain, and did the best they could with that. But some of that was transferred, and it's because we really haven't learned the lesson yet. And what I'm speaking about is, in the world today, there are struggles. There's the issues of racism and inequity and a whole lot of other things that exist, and what that says to us is we still have some work to do, and so we reach to so many people. And so I want to begin in the way that I've been taught, by thanking Creator and thanking the ancestors of all places, of all people, of all races, of all genders, of all ways. I'd like to invite my ancestors to come and sit with me today, and when I say that, I want to invite your ancestors. Invite them to come sit with you, to come be with you, to come listen, to come to participate, because we recognize that the ancestors still live through us, in our bodies, in our genes, in our voices, in our songs, in our smells, and everything we do. But the other thing is that's really important that I've come to learn is the ancestors still need healing too. So if they join us, maybe there's something they will hear, maybe there's something that they will feel that will help them resolve, and so that you can then, that portal between you and them can be a little bit clear. I've recognized throughout these years and been taught and learned that there's so many ways that healing comes to us, and I'm very, very happy and very, very pleased to have with us today a good friend, a maestro, really an internationally recognized musician, healer. I will call him a healer because he really creates sounds and atmospheres and situations in which people can vibrate at a different level. And so today we're going to explore that aspect of how our culture, how our identity, but how music and sounds and rhythms really can heal us and do heal us in many, many ways. And so I'm really, really blessed to have with us today Chris Garcia, and who is, as I said, a prolific musician, internationally recognized, plays all over the world. And so Chris, I want to welcome you today and give you the opportunity to welcome the folks that are listening.
Jerry, thank you so much for the opportunity to be allowed to on your podcast and speak to these folks. Our even how we met is, they say when things are meant to happen, they do. And it was a very not a direct connection, but when we actually met at the California Endowment, and we had met with an email before that, and there's just so many people doing so many good things that it's hard to keep track of everybody. And the one thing I love to do is put a face to the organization that I can actually speak to, as opposed to like just telling somebody to go to a link on a website. So it's I've been very fortunate to have met you, speak with you, listen to you, work with you, and we've had many discussions about lots of things that we have been blessed that they shared our elders and those around us shared with us in order to hopefully be better human beings.
Yes, and I one of the things that um, resonated with me when I saw you, and then was able to witness you perform, if you will, or share, because I don't call it just a performance. You were sharing spirit, you were sharing sounds, you were sharing, rhythms. Is it really touched me. I felt the vibration in my body. I felt something familiar when you were playing that wewet. When you were playing, the different the chachayotes that I heard, something resonated in my body. But music is really important to me. It has helped me through my life. It has helped me to gain a semblance of balance, but it's given me a way also to release and to reconnect in many, many ways. And so I with that in mind, I wonder if you could share just a little bit about who you are and your journey. Where are your people from? Where do you come from, and how did you you get to that place where then music became a part of your life?
Thank you. I grew up in East Los, in the township of Belvedere, which is between Boyle Heights and Maravilla. It's in the county of Los Angeles, not the city of Los Angeles. Both of my folks uh, came from El Paso. My father was born in 1907, my mother in 1918, but they did not meet each other until they came to Los Angeles. And my father came here actually to Dogtown in 1923 when he was 16. He had lost his mom when he was 3, and he had lost his father when he was 16. And that's why his older brother sent him to Los Angeles. And so he was growing up during the Mexican Revolution and all that was happening. They owned property in El Paso and in Juarez. So they were constantly, for the people that might not be aware, there was no border. You could come and go. The actual border, the fence and all that kind of started happening right about 1924, 1925, which is probably why his brother sent him over here. And my mom grew up in Little Italy, which is now Chinatown in downtown LA. And my mother's father was Sicilian, and my grandma was Mexican. So um, they're Angelinos, and my pop bought property back in the 30s in East Los Angeles, um, and eventually served in the Second World War. And it was funny because my dad only had a third grade education, but he taught himself how to read and write. When he came to LA, he only spoke Spanish. He taught himself how to read and write in Spanish and English, and he was a very good typist, believe it or not. And when he was in the armed forces, he was the guy that would type all of the orders from the commanding officer, and he had really good penmanship. So after the war, when he got out for the GI Bill, he didn't buy property because he already owned property. What he did is he went to school and got his high school diploma. But he was a very, he read all the time. He would read the newspaper every day from front to back. And my mother, Esther, was always soloist in various choirs, actually at Queen of Angels. And her two uncles were, one was a folkloric musician, guitarist. The other one was a classical musician, guitarist. And at that time, they would tour between San Diego and Santa Barbara. So my mother would travel with her two uncles, her grandmother, and her sister, and my other aunt danced. And so my mother would sing pieces by Carlos Gardel and Libertad Lamarque, like tangos. They would do 3 sets. It would be tangos for the first set. It would be folkloric Mexican music for the second set. And then they were doing the VFW circuit, and each little group had a little big band, and then she would sing jazz. So my father was not a musician at all, but my mother used to sing around the house all the time. So I heard that voice, my mom's voice. And unfortunately, my wife always, reprimands me that we never recorded my mom singing. I lost my pop in '96 when he was 90, and my mom in '98. and we never recorded her singing. My sister went on to become a singer as my daughter, our youngest daughter, Alegria. So East Los was very different in the 60s and 70s than it is today. It's very insulated. It's still 99.6% Mexican right now. And it was a very insulated community. But what happened is I heard music being played down the block, a few houses down, by a local group, and mostly rock and roll, rock stuff. And was able to just listen to these guys play. And it was a garage. We could sit in there and listen to them play. And the drummer saw that I was watching him. So he said, get a chair and sit behind me. And then you could see my feet as well as my hands. So I did that, and he was probably, I was like 11 and he was probably 18. So I got to sit behind him and watch him play. And, experiencing music live, because even at that time, most of the music we heard was like now it's through little earphones. But back then it was on our stereo. But to hear a band playing live and hear them moving the air, and that particular drummer, his name was Richard Luna, and everybody called him Kuma. And he was kind of built like a Muay Thai kickboxer. And he just had this, he had no technique to speak of. Like if you asked Richard to do a roll, he couldn't do a roll, but he had an amazing groove. And we used to call it mountain drumming, where, after the rehearsal, you could go out and look north and the mountain had moved an inch, because it was just so powerful. And we're not talking about volume. I mean, just every band hired Richard to play. There was a lot of guys that could, spin their sticks and flip things and all that, but they didn't hire them. They always hired Richard. And he was a very giving person. I had no musical, it wasn't until I saw him. And then he said, he didn't live there where they rehearsed. And he said, my drum set's always here. If you want to come and play, just come and play. And then when I come back, when we rehearse, after we're done, play for me and I'll tell you things. So it was very informal. And things like that continue throughout my life, whether it's an indigenous person giving me an instrument or an elder wanting to talk to me or a stranger that I've never met that comes up to me and shares something with me. I've been very blessed and fortunate that this happens, and it happens a lot. I wish I could tell people how it happens because I want them to experience that too. But be honest, I don't know how it happens. They might see me play and then say, you need to have this. I'll share a quick story. I was playing a concert of North Indian classical music, and it was going to start at 8, and it was like 4 p.m. And I got there and I set up, and the whole place is empty except for me and the owner. And this gentleman walked in. He looked like a homeless person, and he sat down cross-legged across from me, and nobody's in the place but us. And he just sat there and watched me set up. And then he said, what time are you playing? And I said, 8 p.m. And he said, what are you playing? And I said, North Indian classical music. And he sat there for another few minutes, and then he got up and he left. So I looked at the owner and I said, do you know this gentleman? He said, no, I've never seen him before. I said, okay. So, I kept working on stuff by myself. And about 20 minutes later, this gentleman walks back in, and his hands are spread apart, and he's holding something in his hands. And I can't, he opens the door with his shoulder. It's a glass door. I can't see what it is. And he walks toward me, and he kneels down in front of me, and he outstretches his hands. And he has a beautiful feather. And he said, I brought this for you. This has great medicine. And I said, what kind of feather is it? He said, it's a condor feather. And I said, is it okay if I set it down in front of my drum so that people will see that before they see the drums? He said, yeah, that's wonderful. So I set it down there, and I said, we start at 8. You're more than welcome to stay or come back. And he said, thank you. And he left. I never saw him again.
Mm.
So, and now I'm going to fast forward about a year and a half. And my musical mentor unexpectedly passed away. And when it came time for his cremation, he used to live in Piru, on the other side of Lake Piru, which is the Condor Reserve.
Oh.
So when he passed, I went into his studio and kind of put all his, it wasn't just me, me and a couple of other people put all his papers in order and all that kind of stuff, his music, his instruments. And he had a jar. He had lived there for like 45 years. He had a jar of hawk feathers that he had gathered, a mason jar full of hawk feathers. So when it came time for his cremation, his wife said, I'm going to give him a book and cremate that book with him. And if there's anything you'd want to put with him to cremate him, that would be great. And I said, well, let's put the hawk feathers around him. And I have a condor feather.
Mm.
So I put that condor feather across his chest, and around him I put all the hawk feathers. And we were there for the cremation. There was just his wife, his daughter, myself, and another gentleman. So that was things like that, right, that don't make any sense. Like the stranger giving me a condor feather that I've never met, him telling me it has great medicine. And he also said, there will come a time. And I didn't know what he meant. I had no idea. But to me, the time was John. My teacher's name was, John Bergamo. So when John passed, like I said, it was unexpected. I had spoke to him on a Thursday because I had concerts up in San Francisco on Friday and Saturday and Sunday, and I told him I would visit him on Tuesday. So I talked to him Thursday, and then I would always talk to his wife. So she called me on Sunday, and she said, John's gone. John's gone. So it was very unexpected. So I grew up in East Los Angeles and started to play music. This gentleman would lend me his drums. And I started to play music, and no money for lessons, no music programs in the schools. Just by watching and listening, there is no YouTube, there is no internet. You'd have to go to a park usually, because I was 12, couldn't go to a club and see people play. And one day, the mother of the bassist said, oh, you need to hear this. And it was a record of music of India. And I had never heard music of India. And it was there was a gentleman playing a drum, and there was a gentleman singing. So the drum played first, then the singing came later, and then the drum and the singing were together. And, it's an album, so there's no YouTube. So it's just a picture of a guy's hands on the drum. Mm-hmm. So I had no idea what it was or how it was played, or, I couldn't find anything at so the library in East Los, the Belvedere Library used to be, I don't know what the term is now, politically correct term is now, but it used to be what we would call the drunk holding tank. And, it was like Andy Griffith that had 3 jail cells in it. And that's where they used to put, drunks. And that was the East LA Library. They took out the bars and, But anyway, so I went to the library looking for anything on this instrument. And there's nothing, the library was tiny, tiny. Maybe the whole thing was like 500 square feet at that time. So there wasn't, and like I said, there's no internet. So, I had to go look for records. And a record is a black petroleum-based product. Because I don't know if everybody knows what a record is.
You're right, man. You're right. I forget, too.
And there used to be this thing called record stores. And you could go in and listen to a record. So I kind of got enthralled by this sound of this instrument. And I asked my folks, if we could, where I should go if I want to study this. And my folks are like, we have no money for lessons or instruments or anything. So you're going to have to like work on your grades and just apply for anything you can to get whatever scholarship or opportunity you can. So my father asked me to speak to my high school counselor, who told me of 3 places that taught that. And there was one was in Connecticut, which I was not going to move to Connecticut. The other one was UCLA. UCLA, I have to say, I went to UCLA when I was 13 to visit. They were talking about, at that point, UCLA was, I think, 0.3 of 1% of quote unquote Hispanics or Latinos or whatever they were calling us. Not even 1%. And the gentleman there that gave us a tour was a law student. And he said, and he had major attitude, which was really funny. He was a Chicano, and he had on a black suit and a badly beat up briefcase. And he said, "Come with me, I want to show you something." So we would follow him, and he's like, "Check this out, man. This is the Asian American Studies building. And it's this beautiful, it's still there, beautiful building on UCLA, And he's like, "Yeah, they have books, they have recordings, they have records, they have archives, blah, blah, blah. Come with me." And then we walked, because UCLA is 5 miles, the campus. We walked, and he's like, "This is the African Studies building." And he showed us, once again, a beautiful building. And then he goes, "Come with me, I got to show you something that we're building right now." And he took us into this building, and there was construction workers there. And they were pulling toilets out of a bathroom. And that became the Latin American Studies building, which is still the Latin American Studies building. Some 40, 83, 93, almost 50 years later. It's like, I was there a couple of years ago. I did a lecture at Schoenberg Hall, and I went to see it. It's like, it's the same building. But, nothing says it used to be a bathroom. Yeah. And it's just a room, So...
So that left an impression on you. I mean,
well,
obviously,
it didn't make me want to go to UCLA. Right. So the good thing is, and the other place was Cal Arts, and I made a phone call, and I spoke to the man who would become my mentor, John Bergamo, and he was very funny. He said, "I'm 17 or something," and he said, "In order to study a percussion instrument, you need to play a melodic instrument." And I'm like, "I don't even know what that means." He's like, "You have to play something that you can play a melody on, a flute, a violin, a saxophone, a piano." And I said, "Oh, I don't have any of those." And he said, "Well, you have to do that in order to come here before you audition." So I said, "Well, I can't do that. We have no money." Literally had no money. And he's like, "Well, where do you live?" And I said, "I live in East LA." And he's like, "Where's that?" And I go, "It's literally 4 miles down east of City Hall." And he's like, so there was complete and utter silence on his side of the phone call. And then he said, "Is there a junior college by you?" And I said, "Yeah, East LA College." He said, "Go there and take every music course you can possibly take, and then call me in a year." So it's because of him that I was already going to East LA College. I was going to East LA College since I was in the 10th grade at high school. I was taking philosophy and psychology courses, no music courses, until he said that. And then when I got out of high school, I enrolled full-time at East LA and just took music courses. And the 2 gentlemen, the only people in East LA College that had PhDs were the music teachers, Dr. Hollis and Dr. Oberwein. And I told them I had a year to prepare to do this. And they, gave me 18 music courses. And in a year, I was able to audition at Cal Arts for John Bergamo. And I did the audition and actually waited and waited and waited and waited. So I'm sorry, I have to give context. And the context is, there's no YouTube. There's no internet. I can't see what Cal Arts is about. I have to drive to Cal Arts. I have to get a ride to Cal Arts to see Cal Arts. There's no, or make phone calls, actual phone calls. So, I called this complete stranger who happened, once again, he was like this nice human being who said, "This is what you can do. You know, he didn't have to say that. He could have said, you know, you're out of luck. Sorry. But he didn't. So I was able to go there and study Indian music and music in general. And so I went from East Los, which is 99.9% Mexican, to Cal Arts, which is no Mexicans. You know, there's no Mexicans. There's no people with Spanish surnames. I'm not even going to say Hispanic or Latino. There's no people with Spanish surnames. There was two actually, but they were not from California, and most of the people were not from California, and like 30% of the student body was not even from the United States. So I went from this very insulated community to this other community, and like I said, I had a full scholarship, but I didn't have money for food or books or stuff like that. And my parents didn't have money for that. So, you would sleep in the library. It was open 24/7 or under stairways, or, people would let you crash in a garage. And I was taking 18 units a semester for the first year and meeting all these people from all over the world, that I knew nothing about the rest of the world, And since none of them were from California, they didn't know what a Mexican was. They had no concept.
Yeah.
So they had no predisposition or prejudice. They had no inkling of that. So I was treated as a human being and nothing less than a human being. So that was interesting. Right. And I remember I brought them to East LA. My mother said, "Oh, see if they could bring you, and I'll make a meal for them." And I brought 6 of them, the 6 percussionists. I should say at that time, the school had 375 students, and now there's 1,500 students. At the time, tuition was almost $4,000, and now tuition is $52,000.
Wow!
So it's another place, another galaxy. So anyway, these guys came to East LA, never been to East LA. None of them are from LA. And my mom made, everything she could that's Italian, Mexican, Japanese, and Chinese, which they devoured everything. They just ate everything. But when I would play in East LA, people would be, there might be fights. People might be shot. People might be killed. People might be stabbed at a gig. That was like just normal. That's like how I grew up. I did that for years. So when you went to this other place, and of course, most of the people there that were musicians had been studying since they were children. They had had lessons all of their lives. So I was the odd man out, which was fine. I didn't feel that way, but I understood the difference. These opportunities came up because of my parents. I was blessed to have both parents in the home. Some of my neighbors were single. They just had their moms, or mostly just their moms. And there was a lot of us. My neighbors, I had 8, and there were 8 of them. They had 8 children next to us, and across the street they had 6, and there were 6 of us. So that's like 20. That's a village. That's 25 of us. And we grew up in the streets. Yeah. Just come home at nightfall and be out there. And we lived on the hill. We lived on Rowan Avenue, which is a hill. And you would play football and baseball on the hill. Because if you played on the flat streets, there was more traffic. So if you played on the hill, you weren't going to break anybody's window. The ball would roll down. It's really funny. Just things we just did.
It's interesting, Chris, because you're mentioning a lot of things that may seem just commonplace,
right?
But I think as we live this life, we recognize that we get teachings, we get blessings, we get challenges along the way. You mentioned the hill, right? And it seemed like in order for you to fulfill this yearning to play music, to play beats, to drum, to feel rhythms, that it was uphill. You didn't play on a level playing field. It was uphill.
Right.
And maybe those football games, maybe those baseball games on the hill, helped you to realize that just because you're on a hill doesn't mean you can't score a touchdown or you can't win. Maybe, seeing your parents work so hard and not give up, in spite of your father not being able to read or write, him going to school, maybe that was a teaching. Maybe the teaching of, you hearing and seeing music all around you, your mother singing, even though you didn't record it on a recorder, your spirit recorded
Oh,
her
for sure.
spirit within you. Maybe that's part of the journey, and maybe that is part of, what helped you to get where you're at.
No doubt in my mind.
As you end up there at, at a, at this educational institution that you are, one of the only ones that, is rooted in your culture. But what also, hits me is you mentioned that feather, you mentioned the gifting, that you were open to receiving as well. You were open to, and you went after it. I'm sure you took the bus to have to go over. You had to call. You had to seek out. And that spirit of seeking out, then in a good way, then brings you to opportunities. Um, and I'm sure it also presented you with many challenges as as a Chicano, as a Mexicano, Latino. Um, in this music field where, I'm sure people don't see many people that look like us like that.
Well,
You
I
know,
have to say, my folks were my first mentors, no doubt in my mind. I mean, what they came up through and dealt with and all that kind of stuff. And they always treated everybody as a human being and nothing
Yeah.
less, and expected to be treated as a human being and nothing less. And if they were ever treated less than a human being, they let that person know about it. So it was very interesting. And I think that's a Texas thing, because they were very like, they never treated anybody less than a human being, and always said, you treat people like humans. You do nothing less than that.
Yeah.
And they led by example.
Yeah.
They led by example. They put all of us through school, which was really, really. My dad was a carpenter.
Yeah.
That was really difficult. I can't even imagine how he did what he did.
Yeah.
But it was just a steadfastness and a resolution to be your best and do your best. And that's all from my folks. And, like, I didn't know all my grandparents were gone except my mother's mother, Beatriz. So
well,
watching them, go ahead. I'm sorry.
The other thing that because I grew up as a musician as well, and I had a similar experience of sitting around as my cousin, who was a drummer in a band in Compton, and I was a little kid, I just loved to listen to music, but it was interesting to me that you showed up and you had this guy that said, "Sit behind me, watch me."
Right.
Right. And this guy that had some kind of spirit, because you say, I mean, maybe technique he wasn't, but this spirit, and so people called to him because he brought that spirit. And I'll say to you, the thing that drew me to you is I felt the spirit. I mean, I saw your technique, I saw all of that, but I felt your spirit. So I wonder if you can talk to me a little bit about that spirit, about because we now recognize that we have long lineage of spirit in our history, in our culture. There. I didn't know, and when I grew up, that we had all this indigenous knowledge, this indigenous medicine, these indigenous instruments. I didn't know about any of that. So I tried to mimic, what I saw, which didn't really recognize the traditional music or sounds or rhythms or even medicine within the music of our people. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about that, because I know you have significant knowledge about our Mesoamerican instruments and our indigenous instruments and that history as well.
Thank you. Well, my other teacher there was an Indian teacher, right? Like, they say you don't choose the instrument chooses you. So I was, I didn't know anything about Mesoamerican instruments. It wasn't part of our upbringing. It wasn't around. I mean, at that time, I'm talking about the 60s and 70s. The whole danza movement was just starting to come into fruition in the 70s. It wasn't a commonplace thing like it is now. People don't know that. It wasn't happening, The interesting thing about these musicians, whether they were Indian or Italian or whatever they were all maestros at their instruments. And they had no problem teaching a Mexican kid from East LA about any of this stuff, because music is beyond all of that. Music is beyond borders and boundaries and languages, and it's beyond all of that. So I actually was invited to play Indian music with an ensemble, not Indian drumming with an ensemble, and there were different people playing different instruments. And I was asked to play with one of them. I actually played with each of them individually as well as collectively. And that's when I was first asked to play the indigenous instruments. He had indigenous instruments, but he wasn't a drummer. We were not playing quote unquote indigenous music. We were just playing the instruments. That makes sense.
Yeah.
We were not playing within the context, because I didn't have that context. I had the context of drum set and jazz and rock and funk and all that, and the concept of North Indian classical music. And I also played marimba and piano. So it was a very different context for me to play these instruments, and then getting into these instruments and starting to be invited by danza groups to play with them and experience these drummers and how they led, or actually how they followed the dancers, because the drummer follows the dancer in this tradition. The dancer does not follow the drummer. So I learned these rhythms. I became aware of the instruments. And then, you start doing research, meaning as you get into it, you find out, like I was immersed in Indian music, and in drum set and all. Now I'm immersed in the indigenous instruments of Mesoamerica and Mexico, because they're two different regions.
Can you talk about some of those instruments, just so
sure, of course,
what instruments you're talking about?
Of course. So in Mesoamerica, and I'm going to give a contextual time frame. So the earliest radiocarbon-dated image we have of these instruments, and I don't mean one person playing, I'm talking about several people playing these instruments in a context. There's the tlapan huehuet. So the tlapan huehuet is about 4 feet tall. You play it standing up. The huehuet you play sitting down, and it's very short. This is an issue we have with words as time goes on. People say the tlapan huehuet is the tall one. The huehuet is the small one. That is a drum carved out of a single tree trunk. It has 3 legs in the shape of thunderbolts. And if you look in the codices, which we will get into in a minute, you will see that some of the heads have jaguar and some of them do not. And that's because I believe, I'm paraphrasing because I don't have the exact quote to give you. The jaguar heads were put on drums that were used during warfare. The non-jaguar heads, like the elk heads or the deer heads, were done for like ceremony. So this drum, the first image we have of it goes back to 790 AD from the murals of Bonampak, which are Mayan. Right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Tenochtitlan, the Mexica Azteca tradition, the Tenochtitlan isn't founded until 1325. So that image, which has been radiocarbon dated, obviously they didn't make all those instruments that day, but that's the earliest image we have of them. So that's the tlapan huehuet. So huehuet means venerable one in Nahuatl. And there's a whole book from the 16th century called the Huehuetlatoli. which is a book of aphorisms and conundrums by the Mexica Azteca people. I'm using both. The word Aztec does not come into existence until 1835 by Alexander von Humboldt, who lived in Mexico for 8 years and started asking people where they came from, and they kept saying Aztlan. So that's how the term Aztec comes into use. But there's no Spanish or indigenous documentation prior to that where those people call themselves Aztec. Right now, there's a book that's been translated that uses the word Aztec. And people are saying, oh, look, that's actually the word they were using. But context, you have to do research. 1835 is the first time that word is used. That particular book was not translated until 1949. And the people that did the translation were going back to von Humboldt and General William Hickling Prescott, who used the term Aztec in English. Okay, so the first instrument is the huehuet, which actually comes from a tree called an ahuehuete tree, which is a Mexican cypress that also happens to be the national tree of Mexico. That's a single tree trunk. The interesting thing about, if you look at there are 2 drums in Mexico. One is in the Anthropological Museum, and the other one is in Texcoco. And the drums are beautifully carved, single tree trunk, without heads on them. They don't have heads on them. And if you look at the top of those drums, you will see that there are no pegs and there are no marks. So the way the head was affixed to the drum at that time was not through nails or pins or pegs. So they had another way, which we don't know, or I have never heard. I only know one person in Los Angeles that can mount a head without pegs or without nails or without staples. That's Raymond Ramirez. I don't know anybody else that can do that. So the main drum is the tlapan huehuet. The second drum, which is also carved from a single piece of tree, is called the teponazli. The teponazli is a 2-tongued drum. And the images of the drums being played are always like a string quartet as a cello, a viola, 2 violins. When you look at these instruments being played, it's always a tlapan huehuet player and a teponazli player and an ayakashli player, which is a rattle, and usually somebody playing a tlapitzali, which is a flute, a high-pitched flute. And they are playing with their hands, they're not playing with sticks. So the first question people would ask is, well, how do you know this? And the way we know this is because we have in existence today, 2020, there are 530 Mexica codices, which are books. Unfortunately, they are not known by what they cover. Most of them are known by the name of the family in Europe that owns them. So there are books on music, there are books on trade, there are books on the raising of children, on what was taught, how it was taught, on warfare, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And these instruments are seen again and again and again. The largest codice we have was done in conjunction with a Franciscan missionary named Bernardino de Sahagún with indigenous scribes. So that's the Florentine Codice, which is 2,400 pages long.
Wow.
And when you open that codice, each page is separated into 2. The left-hand side of the page is in Spanish, and the right-hand side of this page is in Nahuatl. Now, this was uploaded to the internet for the first time in October of 2017. So I think right now, as I'm speaking, I believe we only have 5 of the 530 codices online. It used to be you'd had to go to the Vatican and ask for permission to look at a codice, or you had to go to Florence. Like the Florentine Codex is called the Florentine Codex because it's in Florence, Italy.
Right.
So all of these things, the reason that was done is because, according to Sahagún, he said in order to beat the devil, you have to know the devil. So his first intention was to gather information by elders on different aspects of the culture, on everything from the marketplace to foods to music et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But this is like a 40-year thing. And as he's getting into it, a lot of people make that quote, in order to know the devil, beat the devil, you have to know the devil. Mm-hmm. But like a few years into it, he writes that he was wrong. That what the people believed in and how they believed was equal to what he believed and how he believed what he believed. Mm-hmm. And he eventually gets called back to the Spanish Inquisition and asked, why are you documenting this? Because the person, his elder who asked him to document this, had passed away. Now, the thing about all of these books, and there's very many of these, not just the codices. Yeah. Right, there's 9 indigenous Spanish dictionaries from the 16th century. So, and I should also say that Mexico, compared to the rest of South America, where the Spaniards were also, the amount of books printed in Mexico in the 16th century, I believe it's something like 450 books. This is when printing is just starting to come into being also, as opposed to like 18 books in all of South America. So the people in Mexico, I mean, they were giving them this information, these books. They were printing these books for them to read. I mean, why would you print 450 different books in one country and print 18 in a whole continent, South America? Mm-hmm. So these instruments are what we call the Mesoamerican instruments. Mesoamerica, if you cut Mexico in half, it would be Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, Belize, part of Costa Rica, and Nicaragua, and El Salvador. Mm-hmm. So the murals of Bonampak are found in Chiapas. That's where they're found. This is our history, which has been documented. Right. The reason that people gravitate toward the Mexica codices as opposed to the Mayan codices is because there are only 4 surviving Mayan codices that they have found. Most of those were destroyed in 1560. Remember, Mexico was invaded in 1519. Tenochtitlan falls with Spanish and indigenous allies against the Mexica Azteca people. In 1562, Diego de Landa destroys any Mayan codice he can find because of the American Inquisition. Right. So if you can stop and think, when I do a lecture at a university, I usually find out, how many, let's just say there's 100,000 people at this university. And I say, imagine if 90,000 of you drop dead. What's left? You have 10,000, but you might not have, some of those people are music majors, some are philosophy majors, some are lawyers, some are, it's amazing that we have anything left. Yeah. That what we have was held on to and revered. And I should say a lot of these books that I'm talking about were not published until the 18th century. Because according to letters from Cortez and King Charles V of Spain, who, by the way, was a Habsburg, he didn't speak Spanish, they did not want the books to fall back into Mexico because they feared it would instill pride in the indigenous people for what had been taken.
Right. Let me stop you there, because I think you said some very profound things. I mean, we're right now in the midst of a pandemic in which we're losing people, we're losing lives. People are grieving, and struggling with losing people, and we often fail to recognize that our ancestors went through a time in which we lost thousands and thousands and thousands of relatives, of parents, of grandparents, of children, of women, and that came through a conquest, that came through a historical process.
An invasion.
It's
not a conquest.
Okay, an invasion. And not only that, in their attempt to destroy us, attempted to destroy our books and our music and our way of life and our ceremonies. That's part of the trauma. That's part of the historical trauma that we still live with today. And I think, that's why the music and the stories and the history, and that's why I asked you about this, because there's many people that don't recognize that we as a people have a rich culture, a rich education, a rich sense of wisdom, a rich sense of being artists and musicians, and the floricanto and the cultura and all of those things live within us, and so when I saw you and I heard you and you spoke about this with that sense of pride, it touched me, and I believe that's why, even when you went to began school, these master musicians that didn't know you, I believe they felt your spirit. I believe they felt the spirit of your ancestors, in you. And I heard you talk about, the rhythms that you're trying to learn rhythms, and you didn't have a drum set, and you would play on the desktop, or you would play on your lap, and you would even play with your mouth these
Right,
rhythms,
right.
and because it was in you, and I'm as we, and I knew we would get to this point where we had so much to talk about, so because of that, we're gonna continue this next session as well, but I want to, allow, Chris, maybe we'll play a piece and listen to a little bit of music, a reflection of some of this music, and then give you an opportunity to kind of close it out today with some significant words about what music has meant in your life, what rhythms have meant in your life, what these instruments have meant in your life. So let's listen to this piece right here, and then I'll let you comment on it, and then we can have you close it out with some final words.
Okay.
Ontetepehuac en Chachayoac. Ontetepehuac en Hubo una siembra. Hubo una dispersión. Hubo una siembra. Hubo una dispersión. Esto se dijo de un orador real que aconseja bien a la gente. Que aconseja después de que él habló, después de que él habló, ellos entendieron su verdad, fue dicho, y ellos entendieron su verdad. La gente ha sido informada. La gente ha sido informada. Ha habido una siembra. Ha habido una gran dispersión de jades. Tomado del Códex Florentino, tomo 4, verso 205.
So, Chris, I want to give you the opportunity to just as we hear the music, we hear the rhythms, just to give some reflections, but also as we close out this session, really to tell us what has our music meant to you? What has it done for you? What are these instruments? How are they part of your life, and how has it impacted you in your journey?
Well, one thing I would like to say before we go forward is the number that is given to the loss of indigenous lives in the Americas is 80 million people, 80 million people, which is unfortunately the largest genocide in the history of the world. And when I lecture and I tell people this, they ask if that number is true. They said, and mostly it's like, I didn't know any of this. I've never heard of this. And that was part of our issue. It's like, is that you can't look up something you don't know exists. Mm-hmm. And, maybe if I had heard indigenous music earlier, I might have been involved earlier, but I didn't hear it until much later. And the Indian music caught me. The piece that we heard is called A Scattering of Jades, and it comes from the Florentine Codex. And the quote is, "The people have been well informed. They have been enriched. There has been a sowing. There has been a great scattering of jades." And every jade has multiple facets like life. The problems I see is people get information confused with knowledge, and knowledge confused with wisdom. So at high school, everybody gets a diploma, the same diploma, whether you failed almost everything or you were a straight A student. You get the same, and that piece of paper says you have fulfilled the requirements. That's all it says. It doesn't say what we taught you. It doesn't say what you learned. It says you fulfilled the requirements. And every human being is going to do something different with the information that they have received. Information and experience is knowledge. So if I read 1,000 books on cooking, but I never cook anything, I have the information on how to cook, but I need the experience of cooking to get the knowledge of it. So once I get the tools and the skills to gather the information to actually do it and have the experience, then it's a matter of what we do with that knowledge. And I use an example of, I said, if I gave your mother, your father, your grandparents, and you a frying pan, an egg, a teaspoon of oil, and a pinch of salt, and ask you all to make an egg, one of those eggs is going to taste way better than the others. But you still have the same tools, and you have the same information. We don't have the same skill set. So people get lost in the information sometimes and never get to the other part, because there's always so much to learn from everybody and ourselves, about ourselves. Every person, every place, everything, every thought has a resonance. And sometimes it's like if there's a restaurant you like, as an example, or a book that you found that you like, and you share it with somebody saying, I really enjoy this, I hope you like it, or the meal, and they say, yeah, it was good, but for whatever reason, at that moment and at that time that they experienced it, it didn't resonate with them. That does not mean that you have a better resonance than them, or they have a better, it just means that at that moment, it just wasn't there. And what happens is sometimes when we expect too much, that resonance doesn't happen. Sometimes it's usually when we don't expect anything that we're overwhelmed with this thing that catches us, that just grabs us and lifts us up, which is what drumming does for me. And it doesn't do it for me in the sense that I need an audience to see what I'm doing. My intention for playing was never that. My intention was just to be the best musician I could be with the instruments I had in front of me, to play with the best people I could play with in order to learn from them. And so when I'm performing, which is not a great word, and when it's ofrenda, I guess is a better word, is they're experiencing everything as I'm experiencing it for the first time. It's interesting. There's times I've mentioned to you, Jerry, where it's like you have 20 minutes to do something, and I'll write down, okay, because I have 20 minutes, I'm going to do these 3 or 4 pieces in this particular order. But what happens is sometimes when I start to play, I don't play any of that. And it's because something is telling me to do something else. And I can't tell you who's telling me, but it's just not coming out. I've actually sometimes started, I'm going to start with a specific piece, and I start playing, and all of a sudden it goes somewhere else. And it's not about lack of attention or intention. I believe that it's our ancestors, and it's all of these things that are telling me, what you have is fine, but right now that's not what's needed. This is what's needed. And you just go. It's like riding a wave. You don't tell the wave where to go. You just kind of try and hold on to that wave, because eventually it's going to throw you off and put you back under the water. And there's many times where I go in with a very specific, I'm going to play this, this, and this. And it just doesn't happen. It just doesn't happen. And so you surrender to it. It's not about imposing your will on something. It's about plugging into this thing I'll give you an example of my daughter. My father passed when she was 8 months old. But there's things that she says and does that my father did that she's not aware of at all. And I recognize it when I see it. And it used to overwhelm me, when she would say something that only my father said. I'm like, where did she? And there's no film of him saying this or us talking about it. It's just this thing that comes out. And unfortunately, the more we find out through research, and when I say research, I mean being with the elders, listening to the elders, sitting with your contemporaries, learning from your peers, reading, the red and the black. Our thing is the red and the black. That's all the codices are on red ink and black ink. And we should be open to everything and everyone where we can learn to be our best. So I know these rhythms. I can rattle them off for you. I can play them back for you. But sometimes, like I said, even with that in mind, it goes someplace else. And instead of trying to, I wanted to do this, I just let it take me where it takes me. And so my intention is to just get out of the way. It's not about us or me or. There's too many great people and great players. And there's, to have that kind of, for me, to have that kind of attitude. It's just so many great people that have given us so much through their music, through their words, and through their silence.
Yeah. Well, wow, you said so much right there. But the one thing that really resonated with me that really applies to right now is, surrendering. We are at a place, at a time in which we are riding a wave, and we don't know where it's going. We don't know how long it's going to last. We don't know how deep it's going to be. And I think sometimes our own our own getting accustomed to being in control and dictating works against us. What you share with us is that these drums, that these instruments also have spirits, that the rhythms then create a certain vibrance, a certain resonance that carry the spirit of our ancestors. And I believe right now they can help us. When we come back next week, I want to talk more about that, about the true medicine that these instruments carry, even that the rhythms carry, even that the vibrations carry. But for today, Chris, I just want to thank you for sharing all that you've shared. And I know that, even the brief history that you gave us about the codices and about that, that we could go on and on just with that. But I just appreciate, I thought it was really important for you to share that historical sense, especially in the time that we're at, and as we bring this podcast today to a close, and we'll be back next week with Chris to share a second part. I'd like to invite all of you to really choose some music. Choose some rhythms that help you right now, that resonate with your spirit, that allow your spirit to find calm, allow your spirit to surrender, that connect you with your ancestors, and call that medicine forward. Because we need that medicine right now, not just for you, but the universe needs that medicine. We need to vibrate at a different level. And so I want to invite you to do that. Hopefully you join us next week. Again, and listen to the second part of the podcast with Maestro Chris Garcia. And, may you ride the wave of the sacredness and the medicine of your ancestors and share that with the world so that we can have more blessings, that we can have more rhythms that allow us to be well in peace and harmony with all our relations. Thank you and have a beautiful day.
Thank you very much.
For more information about Healing Generations and the Healing Generations Institute, visit nationalcompadresnetwork.org and be sure to subscribe to stay up to date with our new releases.